We have implemented REST API for the users where we can create a user, we can update user, we can get the users, and we can delete the user. But there is some issue. Like, let's say if I want to send name as null and age as negative value and email which is invalid email. So once I try to hit the API, as you can see, my user is created. So we should not allow this. That's why backend validation is important. In this video, we are going to take REST API we built in previous episode and add a proper request validation using Spring Boot and Jakarta validation. We will use annotation like @ not blank, email, @size, @minimum, and connect them with @valid, and finally build a clean validation errors response. Let's get started. Before writing any code, let's understand what we are going to build. Our client will send requests to the Spring Boot REST API. Instead of directly accepting that request, we will validate it against the rule defined in our DTO. So the DTO which we have here, like user DTO, here we are going to add the validation. So if everything is valid, in that case only the request continues to service layer. If something is wrong, Spring Boot stop the request and return the validation error. This is simple concept, but it is an extremely important part of building relatable APIs. You might be wondering, if my Angular or React mobile application already validates the form, why do we need backend validation? Because you should never trust the client. The REST API can be called directly using Postman, curl, another application, or even a malicious script. Front-end validation useful for user experience, but backend validation necessary for data integrity and security. So think about it this way. Front-end validation help the user while backend validation protect the system. Never treat front-end validation as your security boundary. For validation in Spring Boot application, commonly use Jakarta Bean validation. Instead of writing multiple if-else condition to check if it is null, if the length is matching with our required length, and if age is negative or not. So instead of writing lot of if-else condition, we are going to use some annotations which are there in Jakarta Bean validation. So we have to add the dependency. So you have to open in pom.xml file, and here you can add a dependency from after this. So this is the dependency which is Spring Boot starter validation dependency. So save it and it will download the dependency. Yeah, so that dependency is downloaded. Now we have to go inside the user DTO and we can add the annotations. ID we can ignore because ID is going to generate from the backend. So let's add our first dependency on the name. So we can use @not blank here. Not blank is specify here like it should not be blank value. It should not be having any white space, and it should not cannot be null, right? And let's say if that is the condition, then what error message we want to show to the UI. So we will say like name is required item here, right? And we can also specify the minimum length and maximum length using the size annotation. So you have to put size here and import from the Jakarta validation constraint, and you can put the minimum size, what the minimum length of the name we want. So I want the minimum should be 3, and the maximum, what is the maximum value which I want. So it would be 50, right? For the age kind of thing, let me make it as the wrapper class so that we should have the proper validation which we can add here. So let me update from int to integer. So let's use @not null here, and you can see like if you put not and just press the control and space so that you can get the all the suggestions. So I'm going to use not null here, and if it is the age is null, what the error message we want to show to the UI. So let me add a message like age is required, and then now we are going to add the minimum. So what could be the minimum age which we want? So I'm going to use the minimum like this minimum, and inside that value which I want should be, it should be greater than 18. So minimum value should be 18, and the message should be like age cannot be less than 18, right? Let me add for email. For email we can as directly like we can say as not blank, because we want though the value should be present for the email always. And let me add the message if that value is not present in my request. So if that value is not present in my request, I should add the message like email is required. And what I will do here, we can add the email as annotation so that it will do the email related checks, like the regex, what were the email, we can say the regex, like it should have the at the rate, it should have the dot at the last, so that validation will be done by this at the rate email annotation, right? So you can explore many more validations here. We have added the validation, but to make it work we have to update our this controller class, like the function which we have create user. So before, like at the request body, we have to add one more annotation here, like at the valid. So this at that valid is going to check from the, like you can see the Jakarta validation. So if all the request body, if all the parameters are valid, in that case only it will going to call this service method. If anything is there which is not properly like given from the UI, so it will going to fail that request. Now let's start the application and see. So as you can see, the application started now, and let me hit the API from the Postman. So we have the null -10 and Govi, and let's see everything is valid. So we are getting bad request from the API. So if you see that we are getting validation failed argument 0, like from the user DTO, and what it is saying, user DTO field email rejected value for this, then we should get the message here as well in the console, right? But we should get that error message on the UI. Let me pass at least one positive scenario. So let me update the name as ABC, and age as 19, because we have kept it as 18, should be minimum. And let me add the email which is the valid email, and let's see if that we're able to save the data. Yeah, so as you can see, we are able to create the data inside the table, and if I refresh this one, I should get the data which we have just created. So we are able to create the data, but let's say if I have any invalid information in my request body, in that case I'm getting bad request, but we are not able to get any error message, right? So we should make it as a clean response structure so that we can get the actual error on the UI as well. So to make the API response structured way, we need to create one global exception handler. So let's create a new class here and make it as global exception handler. And let's create it in another package. So let me make it as exception, right? So we are going to have global exception handler, and above that we need to add one annotation which is add that rest controller advice. So Spring will going to check for this annotation. Let's say if any exception is happening, then Spring going to check for this annotation. If there is any class annotated with rest controller advice, it will check if that exception is handled in that any of the function or not. So let's create another function to handle that exception, which is a method argument not valid exception. So let's add one annotation exception handler, where we are going to specify for which exception we want to handle this function. So I will say method argument not valid exception dot class, because here we have to specify the class name. Now create the function public. It will going to return the response entity. So let me create a response entity like this. And what type we want? Generic type will be API response. And in the API response, we want to send the object right now, right? So the name of the function as handle x method exception. We can rename it in the future based on our requirement, but let me keep it like this only. And just put this exception name as a parameter in your exception class like this. So we have imported that exception class. Okay. Now let me handle that exception from here. So what we will do, to get all the errors which we are able to get in this, we can have the multiple errors, right? So let's create one map, and like this map of string as validation errors. Here we'll say new of linked hash map, and for if you see that the exception which we have created here, that exception class, so which will be the ex, and that get bind result dot get errors, get field errors, right? We can say get field errors, so it will give me the get the first error set with field if any found, right? So we are going to use that, and what I will do, I will going to iterate those errors. So let me use the for loop here, and I will say field error like this. I will say error, and we'll say get binding result, right? Dot get field errors. So we are going to use this one, right? So we are going to iterate the list of errors which we got from the spring in this from the that Jakarta validation. So what I will do, I will say validation errors dot put. What we want to put here? We want to put error dot get field name, right? Get field name, and error dot get default message. So whatever the message which is the default which we have configured, that should come here. And now let's create one API response object, because we want to send that to the API response, right? So API response equals to new API response, right? And then response dot set status. So what status I want to set it here? HTTP status dot bad request, right? Dot value. So whatever the bad request value which will have like 404, sorry, 400, we will send that code in this. And response dot set message, response dot set message here like validation failed, or we can say the error validation error, or we can validation failed. Now response dot set message, sorry, set data. So data will be validation errors we want to send to the UI. And now we are going to create a response entity. So return the response entity, sorry, response entity dot status, which will have the http status code dot http status dot bad request, right? And the body we are going to have, which is my response. So I think we have done with this. Yeah. Now let me start the application and see the result. Yeah, so my application started now, and let me hit the API now. So we have the invalid data, and let me hit the API. So yeah, we are able to get the error. Must be well formed email address, and age cannot be less than 18. So like this, we are able to get. Let me put the name as null, or we can get the exception for that as well. So we are able to get the email like this. Name is required, age cannot be less than 18. So how like this we have implemented. Let me see in the put API as well if I can able to update any value which is invalid. So oops, I think we need to add that valid in the put API as well. So let me go inside the user controller, and in the put API, let me add @valid before @request body. So right like this. Let me restart the application now. So I think application, yeah, I think application started now. Let me hit the API again for the put, and we can see the same name is required. And for the email, if you have seen that we are able to get the error like must be well formed email address, that message we can change based on what we want to send to the UI. So let me go once in the user DTO, and here at that valid we can add our message. Let me add my message like email is not in valid format, right? This error I want to send. So let me restart the application again. Yeah. So let me see if we are able to get the valid error which we have configured now. Yeah. So email is not in valid format. That's how we can add our validation and we can change something. And let me check for the put if we are able to get the valid information for positive case. So let me update as Aman and send it. Yeah, so we are able to update the record as well. So like this, we have implemented the validation. Before we finish, let's talk about a few real world practices. First, never rely on front end validation. Second, validate request DTOs instead of exposing your database entity directly. Third, don't put complex business rule into bean validation annotation just because you can. Simple structural validation belongs at the API boundary. Business rules such as whether a user allowed to perform an operation usually belongs in your business or service layer. And finally, keep your error responses consistent and avoid exposing internal exception detail to the client. So let's have an assignment. You have to complete one assignment for me. Like you can put one field which is private long phone number here, right? And that number we can add some validation like it should not be blank. It should have the valid format of mobile number. The minimum and maximum value we can specify like it should not be more than 10. It should not be null. Those kind of validation you have to add, and then test both valid and invalid requests using Postman. If you complete the assignment, drop a comment saying done. I love to know how many of actually you've tried it. And validation error is the only one type of error API can produce right now. What happens when user doesn't exist? Like let's say if I want to update any records and that user doesn't exist, or if I want to get any record that user doesn't exist. What happen when database fails? What happen when any our business logic which we are going to write in the service layer it going to fail? In that case we want to throw some custom exception, right? So in that case, we are going to have our own custom exception or custom errors. Like right now, if you see in the global exception, we have only added the method argument not valid exception, which is coming from the Spring Boot. But we can have like user details not found exception, or let's say user is not the email address is already exist in my table. So those kind of exception we can have the kind of custom exception class that we are going to see in the next video. So stay tuned and I will see you there. Thank you.